Hey guys, my name is Brian Boston, and today I want to discuss for my American History project the history of American banking and the United States dollar. Alright, let's get into it. Okay, so I just want to throw out a little disclaimer. This is more of an auditory and visual presentation. There aren't any bullet points in here for you to read. I personally don't learn that way. It's hard for me to hear and read at the same time. So this is more like a YouTube video format. Alright, so starting with our overview, I first discuss Alexander Hamilton and his first national bank, how he created that idea. Next, the second national bank, which Andrew Jackson opposed, and for good reason. We'll talk about that. Then the greenback during the Civil War and how that was a shadow for things to come. Then I want to talk about the panics during the Industrial Revolution and how that led to a Federal Reserve System, and then finally the weaponization of the United States dollar, which leads us to our modern day. So Alexander Hamilton served as the first Secretary of the Treasury under the new Constitution. This was post-Revolutionary War, and the U.S. needed to reestablish commerce, industry, repay their debt, etc. So in 1790, he proposed the creation of a national bank. He argued that an American version of this institution could issue paper money. Thomas Jefferson, on the other hand, was afraid that a national bank would create a financial monopoly and debated Hamilton's interpretation of the Constitution. Nonetheless, Washington signed the bill into law in 1971, and the first bank in the U.S. operated that same year. And the year after that, the USD was established as the nation's currency, and it was backed by gold and silver at the time. It was until 1811 that the first United States bank had to shut down because it didn't get renewed. Okay, so after the War of 1812, which ended in a draw, the British Royal Fleet disrupted American imports and exports, forcing them to rely on domestic goods. The United States was also in a debt of $127 million. So in 1814, Congress received a petition signed by 150 businessmen from New York City urging the legislative body to create a second national bank. It had the same exact role as its predecessor, just with a higher monetary capitalization. But just like its predecessor, its charter didn't get renewed. The bank closed down in 1836, mostly because of Andrew Jackson. He opposed the bank because he believed Henry Clay was manipulating the bank to help his political opponent, and also he had a personal vendetta against this whole debt-based system. He believed that you shouldn't borrow to purchase things that you wanted, and so Andrew Jackson decentralized the banking system by taking the deposits from the central bank and giving them to the various state banks. Now onto the greenback. During the American Civil War, the U.S. government issued a new form of paper currency, and this was called the greenback, named for its green ink printed on the back of the bills. But the difference between this currency and the previous currency is that this one was not backed by gold and silver, but solely by the good faith of the United States government. They authorized this in 1862 to help repay the war efforts. They issued 450 million of these, so they wouldn't solely rely on borrowing and taxes. So the greenback in the short term provided the much needed liquidity during wartime, but it also led to inflation because they were just printing it. It was an easy way out. It was a cheat code. This sparked controversy in 1870, and eventually the government stopped issuing them. But this idea was a foreshadow to come of unpegging the dollar from gold and just pushing out paper money with no intrinsic value. Okay, so this could easily be my longest slide in this presentation, but I'm going to make things super short because this covers almost 100 years of time. Okay, so the financial panics of 1837, 1873, 1893, and 1907 were all closely linked to weaknesses and instabilities within the American banking system. So each panic pushed Americans into believing that we needed regulation and an established central bank. So this paved the way for the Federal Reserve System Act of 1913 to provide greater stability and oversight to U.S. banks. Okay, so now we are at the meat of this presentation. The Federal Reserve System, created by the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, is the central bank of the United States. It was established in response to a series of financial panics, which we talked about, where it was supposed to provide liquidity in a massive bank run when people were calling in their gold. The FRS uses open market operations to control the interest rates. And as we know, the government issues U.S. treasuries, which mimic bonds, and then the central bank buys and sells those treasuries on the secondary market. And other countries, and even we can buy U.S. treasuries too to fund their whatever. Buying treasuries lowers interest rates, which stimulates the economy. And on the flip side, selling treasuries increase interest rates, which reduces borrowing and spending to fight inflation. And we learned from this course that it acted improperly during the stock market crash in 1929. It was supposed to use expansionary monetary policy, but instead it increased the interest rates during a period of slow economic growth and called in their debts, worsening the depression. Basically, it did the opposite of what I just mentioned. Of course, the FRS isn't perfect, but most deem it necessary. The US dollar began to emerge as a political and economic weapon after World War II. After the war, the 44 allied nations made the dollar the anchor of the global monetary system, pegged to gold. All of the exchange rates were measured in USD. For an example, if you want to trade pesos for rubles, you would have to do pesos to USD to USD to rubles. So this is called the Nixon shock, making the USD the sole global fiat reserve currency. This allowed the US to print money without a gold constraint, while other nations still needed dollars to trade. So essentially, this made the whole world dependent on the good faith of the United States. In 1974, the US struck deals with Saudi Arabia and other oil producers to price oil exclusively in USD. This also forced global demand for the dollar since countries needed to purchase oil, strengthening the US economic dominance, and it created the petrodollar system. With the combination of this and controlling the global banking system, it allowed the US to enforce targeted sanctions, utilize trade leverage, and freeze other nations' central bank reserves. The world operates because of the US. So, in conclusion, despite your moral convictions about what I just mentioned about weaponizing the dollar, currently many countries are losing their faith in the American dollar, and even investors are questioning the concept of fiat currency and turning to Bitcoin and other various cryptocurrencies for a store of value. I hope this was an adequate retrospective for the USD in America's banking history. Please, I encourage you to do your own research and truly grasp how our financial system works. God bless you all, and I hope you enjoyed my final project. Thanks.